Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about Deadpool and Wolverine. Spoilers for Deadpool and Wolverine here. And today, what I want to talk about is how Deadpool and Wolverine changes the Dungeons and Dragons table forever. Okay, so first of all, what do you mean, Scott? How does Deadpool and Wolverine change the Dungeons and Dragons change the Dungeons and Dragons table forever? Well, in my humble opinion, Deadpool and Wolverine is 100% canon to Dungeons and Dragons. Whoa, what are you talking about? How could that be possible? It's complicated. I'm not going to repeat myself. In the link below, you will find an entire video that defines exactly how the path from how Deadpool and Wolverine, if you understand Dungeons and Dragons canon, in my humble opinion, is 100% Dungeons and Dragons canon, in my humble opinion, right? So if you want to see the path, I'll walk you along the path. I'll take you step by step, right, to canon Deadpool and Wolverine, canon to Dungeons and Dragons, right? So go check that out. It's in the link below. All right. So how does Deadpool and Wolverine change Dungeons and Dragons forever? Well, it puts additional pressure on the Dungeon Master. Oh, great! No, you're right. You're not. You're right. You're right. You're right. You're right. That's not great. That's not great. Deadpool is a ton of bad news for every Dungeon Master. Okay. So what do I mean by pressure on the Dungeon Master? I mean Matthew Mercer pressure on the Dungeon Master, right? Catch up, right? Now, if you don't know, Dungeon Masters have, Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Masters have an incredible amount of pressure on them. So Ben from Questing Beast, I think it was back at the end of 2023, maybe 2022. It's been a while now. But he said that the expectations of a modern Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition Dungeon Master, right, is to be a life coach, to know the rules backwards and forwards, and to be a powerful storyteller, right? A powerful narrative guide. Absolutely incredible, right? And he's right, because the reality is Matthew Mercer is like one of the smartest dudes on the planet. He's one of the most talented artists who's ever lived. And every single person who sits down to the Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition table who is alive today in America is going to compare their Dungeon Master against Matthew Mercer. And that is an incredible amount of pressure, right? Now, that pressure is coming from Deadpool and Wolverine on combat, melee combat, okay? So, calm down. This does not affect any of the Rangers, who are shooting arrows, right? And it also does not affect any of the magic in Dungeons and Dragons. None of that needs to be affected. But when you have characters throw down and they do melee combat, there is a new standard, right? What was the standard for cinematic violence prior to Deadpool and Wolverine? There were two. There was Die Hard, and then there was John Wick, right? The John Wick films. Both of them were absolutely phenomenal. Extremely good melee combat, right? Now, I know that gets a little complicated with John Wick, but the reality is he shoots people at melee range. He's using guns as knives. Done. And I fixed it. There you go. All right. But those are real standards, right? And we had to meet that. Like when we run melee combat, we are painting a narrative picture in the mind of the players, right? Of the Dragon Masters. The Dungeon Master is painting a picture in the mind of the Dragon Masters, right? And that has to be incredibly fast-paced, right? And Dungeons and Dragons has a highly detailed combat system, but it also fully allows that combat system to be adjusted to run faster so that we can meet John Wick expectations, Die Hard expectations. All that's out the window, right? The melee combat shown in Deadpool and Wolverine, from Wolverine, not Deadpool. Deadpool stuff, nothing new, nothing flashy, nothing interesting. Nothing in Deadpool and Wolverine really comes from Wolverine. Excuse me. Nothing in Deadpool and Wolverine of significance comes from Deadpool. It's all Wolverine. Like, he's the whole movie, right? But his combat, like, he did this Wolverine crouch. He does it like 3 times in the film, where he walks over, he slides down, he places both feet back, he leans forward, and he puts his fists out, ready to run like a linebacker, right? And he does. And then once he does that, he runs forward, and he uses his snicked extendable knuckle claws to go to town, and he just straight murders humans throughout the film. Stabs in the heart 20 times, cuts their heads clean off. Like it. Like I have waited. I think I read. Yeah, I read X-Men in like 1980. Right. So I have waited 44 years to see this combat, right? To see live action Wolverine. And now that I've seen it, you can forget everything that happened in Die Hard, and you can forget everything that happened in John Wick. There's a new standard for cinematic violence. The gold standard is Wolverine on screen, period. And so every time that you run a melee combat in your Dungeons and Dragons game as a dungeon master, you have to make it that epic. And it is not going to be easy. Not going to be easy, right? We're going to need to start thinking, how do we think about short swords? How do we think about shields? How do we think about spears? How do we think about and also what adjustments to the Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition rules do we need to add in to allow characters to make devastating moves with fist punches and with blades, right? That are fast, furious, and at the epic level that we got from Hugh Jackman. It changes everything. There is a new Matthew Mercer in town when it comes to melee combat in Dungeons and Dragons. His name is Hugh Jackman. He just laid it down, and there is an absolute standard for cinematic violence in a new gold standard for cinematic violence in our Dungeons and Dragons games. We're going to have to change rules, and we're going to have to change pace, and we're going to have to change everything about melee combat because people's minds were blown, right? And then they were blown on Friday when they saw Deadpool and Wolverine. Now when they come and sit at our table at Saturday, we got to be ready. You got to do something new. You got to do something fast. You got to do something epic. There is more pressure on the Dungeon Master than ever to deliver when it comes to melee combat. Yeah, in my humble opinion. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. The important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.